Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Reason We Learn, live with Will Reusch. I'm really excited to have Will with me today because he has been on my radar now for some time. If you're wondering why or how I know Will or how he became someone familiar to me, you may recall back in May, if you follow me or you follow Carlin Borsenko, she and I did a pretty fun thing. I called it to her attention because I saw Will on Instagram trying his best to have a civil discussion with three proponents of critical race theory. And I watched it sort of late at night. I was just sitting there, watching this thing and kind of yelling at my phone because I was watching on my phone. And I got in touch with Carlin and I said, "You have got to see this. You have absolutely got to see this thing." And she said, "Should we do it for the happy hour?" And I said, "Can I join you?" And this was the result. So if you're interested to see that mess, that hilarity, that was May 21st on her show, and I would recommend it. It was pretty fun. And we were just in awe of Will's patience, and it was pretty clear to me that you were trying to have a civil conversation. And I thought to myself, we got to get to know this guy more because this is somebody committed to civil discourse, critical thinking, all the things that this channel is about, the reason we learn, reason. And so I know you had a subsequent interview with Carlin and then you've got your own podcast, but tell the audience who you are in your words. That's how I know Will. Welcome, Will. Welcome to my audience. You tell
Yeah,
us.
thank you so much. Yeah, I mean that gave me some, I guess, like notoriety to some degree in some circles. Uh, I'm a high school teacher, so I've been teaching in Los Angeles for 15 years. Very diverse communities. I mean, like the best and the worst neighborhoods of Los Angeles. So I've taught like kids who are like movie stars and kids who live in cars. So I've gotten a good understanding of how to teach very diverse populations, but what I've watched was I had to leave the public school system just because I would get into too many arguments about what you're doing isn't serving the kids. Let me do my thing, let me do it my way. It works, and then they just basically were saying no enough times that I had to get out. So I'm in a private school now that allows me to teach my way. But also, what it allows me to do is to push back on some of the very common narratives going out that I disagree with, and that's why I started a social media account on Instagram and my podcast, Cylinder Radio, which is just about viewpoint diversity. That's my big things: viewpoint diversity and critical thinking. And I work with Heterodox Academy, which is started by John Haidt, which is like the moral foundations, concepts, and stuff like that. I write curriculum for FAIR, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. Worked with like Irshad Manji and a lot of really, really cool people just about how to bring critical thinking back into the classroom. And I'm able to do that. Right. I'm able to have the conversation that I had that you saw me in because I'm in a very unique situation that very few, I mean, like a handful of teachers in the whole country are in, where they're able to talk freely.
Right. And to what would you attribute both your freedom to talk freely and their lack of freedom to do it? How would you?
Yeah, so I mean, just the institution I'm at and the community that I teach in, even though I'm not a part of it, it's very open-minded to educational ideas, leave no stone unturned type of thing. It's a religious private school. It's an Orthodox Jewish institution, which is interesting for me because I'm not Jewish and I've never even stepped foot in a private school, professionally or personally, until I went to this place. And they get complaints and stuff, not from the parents. The parents there love me; they're very supportive, but from people on social media, and they just know who I am. They know what I'm doing. They know the kind of the typical attacks that I get and stuff like that. So they just crumble them up and throw them away. And that's right. Unusual. And most of my friends who don't teach in this situation, the vast majority, they can't. They have teachers unions. They have a lot of pressure from the higher ups in the school board and things like that. There's a lot of pressure, political pressure, because of the teachers unions and stuff to vote a certain way and things like that. And I think it's a logistical nightmare for like liability and stuff. If you say something out of turn, then you can just bring a lot of unwanted attention to that school district. So they're scared.
It's interesting because we see videos of teachers like that Antifa teacher or even the Utah teacher you may have seen. And I think, well, when they do the thing that is technically approved, the prevailing narrative, if you will, they get in trouble when the parents find out. So I'm actually, even though I know you're right, I know people don't
Mhm.
feel free because their colleagues will come down on them. And as you said, the union. But do you think there's a way people can support these teachers? They can have what you have so they can feel more free to speak out while keeping
Yeah,
their
I think
jobs for the
so.
moment?
I think so. It's just risky. So I'm the co-moderator of the Heterodox Academy K through 12 education community, which is just basically a private Facebook group. But
Right.
it's almost 200 teachers from around the country who just come together and share kind of what they're going through, share lesson ideas and stuff, and to steal the to appropriate the term, a safe space to talk about this stuff and support one another. But it is a risk. I mean, part of the risk is not just where I teach, but also my wife is a business owner and an entrepreneur, and she takes a lot of the financial pressure off me that if I would lose my job, which is still possible, then we'll be okay. So most teachers don't have it. It's just quite a gamble to speak up against something that you think might be kind of wrong, or rub you the wrong way, or give you an uneasy feeling, but could legitimately jeopardize your job. It's just like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And you just kind of let it go. No, it's not that big of a deal. It's something small. Don't worry about it enough times. I mean, people have to hit like almost a breaking point,
Mhm.
and I just think that for most people, they don't hit that breaking point where the fear of speaking up needs to be, less than the fear of the repercussions. And
Right.
right now, I think the fear of the repercussions is just higher.
Right. Exactly. And so I want to talk a little bit about something you mentioned on your website. It's kind of the title of this show, where it's a teaching for wisdom, not certainty. You mentioned today there seems to be a focus on people being certain, which of course fuels the conformity to like one idea, or it's not even so much I want to be certain of what's true, but I want to be certain I fit in, like I have the right answer according to who has defined, the people who've defined the right answer. What did you mean when you wrote that? What were you thinking of?
Um, so just as an educator, a lot of people say like education is activism and things like that. And I think activism assumes that you know the answer because you're pushing for activity to implement whatever you're saying. Where
Mhm.
education assumes that you don't know the answer and you're searching for it. And if we're
Right.
educational institutions, we should never really be 100% certain. I don't care if you're talking about gravity, you keep testing gravity then.
Right.
I just don't think that educational K through 12 institutions are the place to push certainty, especially when it comes to things that are clearly still very, very contentious, still very controversial. When
Right.
the population is split to some degree, then you can't say that it's clearly this and this is clearly uninformed. Because even if it is uninformed, I just see everything, Deb, as like a learning opportunity. So even if someone is a flat earther, I could say, well, I'm certain that the earth is round, but let's dive into why do you support that? And it's such an opportunity to try and like do the scientific method,
Sure.
and then also maybe even get into some like psychological issues of a kid might be just saying flat earth and holding to it because he's really rebellious because he doesn't get a lot of attention at home. And then that's a learning opportunity to become aware about why you are a troll. I just think that there's just so many ways to educate here, and the fact that there's so many people in my field that are missing these opportunities is really a bummer for me.
That was fantastic. It's like, why you are a troll. I mean, let's have a conversation about why you're a troll.
Yeah.
I do want to. Somebody threw up this super chat comment. It says, "Build villages, look up kibbutzim." So
Yeah.
I actually am Jewish, so I know what kibbutzim are,
Mm-hmm.
and you probably do as well, even though you're not Jewish. But he follows it up with this comment: "America has become islands of individuality in a sea of strangers. It takes a village to raise a child. We lost our villages. Now we're losing our children. Without a village, we need government." So there's so much there. Um I What's your reaction to that? I have a reaction to it. What do you say to that?
So I think it's a mix. It's a tricky thing because America is so much about the rugged individualism and stuff. But what made America great, another term, is Alexis de Tocqueville talked about this, is the sense of community and schools because it's not mentioned, education is not mentioned in the Constitution, that should be the 10th Amendment, that should be left up to the states. And the schools that work, and it doesn't even matter, it matters like the Jewish community that I teach in now, but it also, you can find it in Black communities, you can find it in Hispanic communities, you can find it in Filipino communities, like my wife's Filipino, is that element of when a community just supports one another. It's super important. And when they do that with their school, there are a lot of schools in Black communities, like the Ron Clark Academy is one in Atlanta, is when the parents are super involved, the PTA is just like thriving, the parents are there, they're volunteering, the kids are there, the teachers go to the birthday parties. When you get that community element, that's when schools flourish. And when you get these massive schools with 800 kids per grade, maybe whatever it is, 3,000 4,000 students in the school, they're just a number. The parents don't go to any of the meetings or stuff like that. It's such a big entity. You're just another brick in the wall, so to speak.
Right. See, I look at it as, I totally agree with you. But I've been telling people on my channel, because I'd like to sort of abolish the government monopoly on schools, and return it to communities just like that. I've people see me as like the homeschool person, and I do support homeschool, and I do think right now for most people it's certainly the triage. It's kind of like the way to get out quickly. But I would love to see a whole revolution in new kinds of academies, a parallel system where people could create community schools, neighborhood schools again, privately, where they would have that kind of support. Because you see, like John Taylor Gatto said, a school right now is not really a community, it's a network. A real community, you have skin in the game. So as you said, you live there. These are your neighbors. These are your neighbors' children. Everybody's together. The only thing I shy away from with the whole "it takes a village to raise a child" is, I think it takes a village to properly socialize a child, but the parent is still primary. I still think the parent has to have the opt-in, opt-out of how much of that they want, because otherwise we get into the more of the the kind of socialist, you owe something to the community just by being born or just by living there, which is not necessarily true. What I would like to see us teach is rational self-interest. It's kind of like, it's not rational to be a hedonist. It's not rational to be the kind of selfish where you walk all over people. But it is rational to say, you know what? I have something you need. You have something I need. We can help each other. Let's work together. That's rational, but it's chosen, like it's a volunteerism kind of thing. And I think if we built communities that way, we would flourish like we did, in the past. So it's a blend. It's kind of a modified individualism where groups of individuals build it. But that's kind of my take on it. But I agree with you. The community aspect of skin in the game is really important. Now, you mentioned though the wisdom piece. So we know what you're talking about with the certainty, and that this is the one right way. The activism assumes we know the answer. And so then I guess you mean wisdom would be, we're questioning everything.
Yeah, and I think wisdom is kind of, and I've heard a bunch of different definitions. It's like knowing how to live life well and stuff like that.
Okay.
I guess, wisdom is like the things you learn from experience, from those like hard fought like life lessons that are really difficult. You can read a bunch of books on prison, but your first night in prison when people are yelling fresh fish, it's like, now I have some wisdom about being in prison. And what's happening, I think, in a lot of schools is what we're seeing is there's a lot of a fear of failure and just kids becoming failure averse. John Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, is really good about bubble wrapping, all these kids. And I think that you have to teach them, how to deal with failures and things like that. So, when you are certain, then you're not going to test that because you might be wrong. And then what does that mean? Now that bruises your ego, et cetera, et cetera. But my big thing is like seeking disconfirmation. So if I have an idea, then I'm going to try and prove it wrong. And then me being wrong, and I do that on my social media. I put it out there for thousands of people. Like, here's my idea. How am I wrong? And then when I'm wrong, it's like, good. Wow, I'm embarrassed now. I'll remember that moving forward. And I think that's where a lot of wisdom comes from as well.
Well, how do you know when, okay, so if you put an idea out and people say, well, you're wrong, here's how you're wrong.
Yeah.
What is your process to evaluate whether the people telling you you're wrong are correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I don't like just blindly take that, but what it does is it gives me a prompt. It gives me like an aim, like a
I see.
target to look for. So
Okay.
here's why I think this is the best move. Then people say, what about this, this, this? And I can go, okay, let me look up on that. And then I can
Right.
take those ideas, do my own research, or find like people that I really respect that are familiar with that topic. And then I can add those prompts. I kind of like play these different people off each other because I've built a really cool network of very smart people who are experts in all these different fields. Social media can be used in wonderful ways if you use it properly. Just to connect with, I'm friends with all these scientists now, and soldiers, and police officers, and all these different things that I can just be like, hey, this person told me this. Is this legitimate? And then they say yes for these reasons or no for these reasons. And I can just constantly learn and develop
Hmm.
my ideas. Generally, I'm not like completely off, but I'm always going to be, it's almost like a pixelated image. And just
Right.
over time, it gets like more and more and more clear.
Right. And
Yeah.
then do you start with a set for yourself of core principles that are sort of like, these are my core, like, first principles, and I don't really budge from these, but then all these other issues around them, I kind of check them against this.
Like, give me an example of like what corporate, because I have like
Okay.
idea, I have like, I call them like pillars for how to interact with people, but I'm not sure what you mean by like, what do you mean by like
Okay.
core principles?
So for example, one of mine is that I own my life, and so do
Okay.
you. Okay.
Yeah.
So I am my own property. I own this, and anything that you want to do that restricts my ownership of not just myself and my body, but the fruits of my action. So if I interact with something in the John Locke kind of mindset, if I interact with something, especially something occurring in nature, I have added value to it. It now becomes my property. That could be my work product, or, my words, my ideas that I've put out there myself in an original, like, copyright, whatever. So that is mine. And if a third party, or even like another just a second party, right, wants to make a law or make a restriction on that, or own some part of it, they want to come and take a piece of it, they've got to persuade me to give it to them. Like, in other words, they can't, if they come and they just take it, they say, you owe it to me because I said so, that's theft. There has
Right.
to be
You
some
require
kind of,
some sort of social contract.
well, I wouldn't go with social. It's got to be mutually agreed upon,
Okay.
mutually agreed, so that therefore, my first principle is I own myself, and anything you want to do that restricts me, restricts my movement, you've got to show me pretty with evidence, empirically, how you have a right through your ownership of yourself to stop me or to take from me or whatever. So, like, that would be an example of a core principle that I have.
So the pillars that I guess that could be like principle. It's just for me going out. It's not like specific, but it's a lens when how I interact. It's uh, intellectual humility, genuine curiosity, and grace. I don't
Okay.
know. I mean, so the just intellectual humility is like I might be wrong. So I'm always thinking like I might be wrong on this, even if it's something that's like very like deep. Like I'm really sure that we should, that like wokeness is not the best way forward. Okay, but I might be wrong. I might at least be wrong about some elements of that. And
Okay.
then genuine curiosity has helped me a lot when people are acting or supporting ideas that are really crazy. I talked about this a little bit with like flat Earth, but like just having curiosity. Really, I think if we just had more, like, why do you support this? Why do you think this way? And I think that there's a lack of curiosity in so many places, and that's really frustrating because I think curiosity is the kind of the motivator for just about everything. And then the last one is grace, pausing on judgment. Um, just having just you know a, a general sense of like kindness and softness in the way that you interact with people. So I have people saying terrible things to me often, and the more that I can just be gracious, it
Right.
seems to, even if it doesn't help, I think it helps for those watching how I interact,
Right.
students and stuff like that. They're like, wow, that person's really mean to you, and you were still not mean to them back. It's like,
Right.
yeah, yeah, like that's like an important thing for me. So those three things, regardless of what the topic is, I try and always use those filters.
That's okay. That's great. Here's somebody who says, Joseph also added, knowledge is a collection of discrete ideas. Wisdom is the relationship between those ideas.
Mm.
Neurons gather to represent ideas. They are living organisms with the ability to explore the spaces in between knowledge. That's deep. What do you think of that?
Uh,
So
yeah,
the collection of ideas and the wisdom is like the relationship between the ideas.
it could, but I guess the only pushback would be I think there's a lot of people that know those relationships, but when you experience, I don't know, I feel like a lot of wisdom has to come from some level of experience, though, and it might be wrong. Like
Mhm.
Adam Grant, very smart guy. I like Adam Grant. I think he's valuable, but when you hear him talk, my criticism of him is he is an academic. He's an academic. He's kind of spent his whole life in the academic world. Um, he knows a lot about business. He's at the Wharton School, the youngest, but I don't know if he has ever could he even like start a brick and mortar laundromat and run it well. I don't know. And I think that there's just something that you learn when you are running like a brick and mortar compared to if you're a Wharton grad, and you can connect all those dots. You can not just collect knowledge, but you can connect why this is this and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I
It
don't.
feels to me like a
Yeah.
modified version of that sort of serenity prayer, where you talk
Yeah.
about the things I can't change, but what about the things I don't know? So it's like, to me, when I think of wisdom, it's also a function of maturity. So I don't know too many people who are immature who are also wise. And maturity
Yeah.
doesn't make you mean chronological age. So in
No.
other words, the person who has enough humility and integrity, it's kind of like a blend to say, I don't know. That's something I don't know. And that could be the Wharton grad who knows a whole lot about a certain thing, right? But to your point, they haven't started a business from the ground up, a brick and mortar, or they really don't understand. They know a lot about this side of economics, but they don't know supply chain. And even those who know from the book learning or analysis, until you've lived it, like until you've actually, do you remember the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield?
Yes. Briefly, like a bit. Like
Okay, well, there's
yeah.
a scene in his business class, and the guy says, "Well, let's start a business." And he says, "We'll build a factory." And he goes, "Why
Right.
would you build instead of rent?"
Yeah.
And so
You got to pay
there's
off the union guys. Yeah.
right. And we got
Yeah.
to grease the palms of the politicians. And I love that because, as silly as it was, it really illustrated the point that there's wisdom in, sort of knowing what you don't know, and then the willingness, as you do, as you're sort of demonstrating, and I assume you do this in your classrooms too, to admit that to your students, to yourself, to your students, to the people you're talking to, and allow yourself to learn, like that humility plus curiosity plus maturity and integrity, and you kind of roll it in a ball. And I think you have a kind of wisdom there because you're more open to learning new things, and I think the knowledge you have becomes more useful. How useful is it if you know a bunch of things,
Right.
but you're just like, I have a hammer, where are the nails? Everything's a nail. It's like, that's
Yeah,
not a
maybe that's a
nail.
good one. Like connecting how to apply the knowledge, not
Right.
just connecting it to the neurons, but like connecting how to actually apply this in the world, the application element. And another thing to add about wisdom is I think the people that I know that I think of who are wise, they're resolved, like in some way, like they have their stuff kind of like sorted out. They're self aware. They, wise people. They seem like they've figured out things that it's hard to get in a book.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, so tell me how you teach this to your students. How do you approach this kind of thing? I mean, first of all, are the students coming to you? Do you feel right now in your current setting, are they coming to you well prepared for what you'd like them to do, or do you have to do a little bit of remediation to get them there?
No, no. I mean, school, even at my school, which is a wonderful place, but like kids are still like, what makes a good student? Compliance. It's compliance. So do what you're told. Stand up when I tell you to sit up, sit down when I tell you to sit down, take this information, and then regurgitate onto a test. That's a good student. Get good grades and you get into a good school and blah, 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 blah. So they come in and the kids are just waiting for me to just like tell them what to do. And then when I ask them to design something or think outside the box, they crumble, they break. They don't know. They just haven't, they can run through the obstacle course, but if you give them a bunch of plywood and you say make an obstacle course, they just
Right.
can't.
Right.
So I have to kind of ease them into that with like little things. So I challenge them in a bunch of different ways. So like the first assignment I give in my U.S. history class is a perspective assignment where they tell a very impactful story of their life. So the time they hit the winning hockey goal or something. And then they have to tell it from two other perspectives. So They tell a story the way it's been in their head their whole life, but then they have to tell it from the point of view of, let's say, the opposing team's goalie. And then they have to tell it from a third point of view, like maybe the opposing team's goalie's mom. And then they're like, oh, events aren't so clear. It's very much like, my podcast. It's like there's lots of different perspectives to get you to understand the more robust understanding of history. And when they can do that personally, then when we go into different perspectives of historical events, then we can understand that it's all these different perspectives all at once. So I do elements of that. I challenge them also the idea that like they're like a good person. Of course, we're all think of ourselves as good people, but I give an assignment in my U.S. history class about World War II. We look at like atrocities of World War II. So it's like Unit 731, the rape of Nanking, the different events from the Holocaust and things like that. And then they have to identify the different kinds of evil. According to this Professor Roy Baumeister's book, there's 4 different types of evil. And they identify which type of evil was that, and then how have they committed that type of evil in their own lives. So it's very like Carl Jungian, like, recognize how you can be the bad guy. So it's all different things like idealistic evil, it's revenge, it's sadistic pleasure. And then they'll bring up stuff like, yeah, well, I vandalized the bathroom because it was kind of fun to, throw toilet paper around. It's like, that's sadistic pleasure. Or, I hit my brother because he took the last candy bar and I wanted to get back at him. It's like vindictive. So having them realize this stuff, it kind of puts them in uncomfortable places. But that's the point is like, you are human. Atrocities are committed by humans. So you're capable of those wonderful and terrible things.
Now, one thing that I have been questioning lately is how does one teach thinking, critical thinking? And you know what? I got to say, lately, I think I've told you this before in messaging, the word critical has been so tainted that even every time I say critical thinking, I want to change it because it's been co-opted by critical theorists and to mean criticize or deconstruct. And obviously that's not what we mean. We're talking about active thinking. We're talking about analytical thinking and looking into abstractions and so forth. But one thing that I wonder about is you run the risk, and this was something that was always a risk with liberalism, right? Classical liberalism. You run the risk of examining things from so many angles and encouraging kids to examine things from different angles and to respect different points of view to the point where they mistakenly believe that all conclusions are equally valid, so that they've taken in the information, they've taken in the same pieces of evidence, but one kid comes to conclusion A, another one comes to conclusion B, and one is Marx and one is Locke. Okay. But here we are living in the United States where we have some core values and principles such that, like individuals are free to speak their mind. And we do allow for, we have 100% political equality, things that they don't have in a Marxian society and so forth. So how do you teach kids to think critically and yet have discernment and yet come back to the kind of enlightenment values that keep us all free to continue to have different opinions, like in a society where enlightenment values are championed, you can individually be. Are we frozen? I think we're frozen. Okay.
I'm okay.
Okay. You can individually be a communist if you want and go form a little commune and get some land and do that. In a communist country, you can't be a capitalist. Right. So when we're teaching kids these things, like, how do you do that? How do you make sure they're examining things, but they don't become relativistic?
Yeah. So I've talked about like moral relativism a bunch of times, and I can use the Holocaust with my students because they're Jewish. That like I spent time in Poland going to all these camps. You can say that on the extreme, this is immoral. Like anyways, even if you're trying to say like we're trying to boost the economy of Germany or whatever, like in the way it was done, it could have been done better, let's say. So yeah, it's tricky. And I think it's tricky for adults too, because we look at like, Occupy Democrats as like the Instagram account, or, all the way up to like New York Times. I mean, sometimes it has more misinformation than like, some smaller website, but is New York Times like the authority? So it gets really tricky. It really does. What I try to promote is like which one do you side with and why? The why is really important. So I have them do an assignment where they take a mainstream news story and they have to tell it from 5 different perspectives. So like, 2 from the left, 2 from the right, 1 from the center, or whatever, just across the spectrum. And then like which one do you feel represents the closest to like the actual, robust view of this, the cylinder, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and why? So it's a tough thing. I haven't got it completely figured out, but I think it happens through the process of saying, I'm supporting this one. And if you are in an environment that is the opposite of an echo chamber, you're in a place where you can get constant pushback and criticism, then you can keep honing your ideas more and more and more. So I open it up to a lot of conversation. Why do you support what you support? I support this for these reasons. Instead of this one, yes, well, tell me why, and then we can kind of poke holes in it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's tricky.
How do
That's a
you
tough.
feel about the latest trend to allow into, I wouldn't say allow is not the right word, but to equate the what they call the lived experience. So in other words, the what it's basically a fancy way of saying your feelings,
Yeah,
what your anecdotal evidence, okay,
yeah.
with empirical evidence in these debates or these conversations. Because what I have noticed, and I'm even seeing it with middle school, like kids as young as middle school,
Mhm.
is you can start to have a discussion and allow for different inputs. And the expectation appears to be that if one person gives an input that says, well, here the statistics show that X percentage of such and such, okay, facts, right? And they show you where they got the facts. And then the student B says, yeah, but I feel, or in my neighborhood, or this happened to me once. And so therefore that's evidence that all of these people
Mhm.
are, all cops are bad because it happened to my cousin or
Right.
something. And so we're at a point in our society, and I've seen it even in schools, where those two pieces of evidence are given equal weight. When we as teachers, I think, at least in the past, we would have said, now let's look at that. This looked at, 8,000 people across 10 different neighborhoods, whatever. And so, while imperfect still, because you can't know everything, it's more precise information than your one situation. We would explain to them the difference in value of an anecdote
Mhm.
to, quantitative data. And I feel like we're not allowed to do that anymore. How do you feel? Or does that ever come up for you in your classes, or has it in the past, where you
Yes.
have to explain to people?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it does. And I talk about it a lot on my social media too. So like lived experience. What's interesting about this is it's not just to something of the left. They do it a lot with like racial issues and stuff. What I'm seeing a lot of now, and I had a woman on my podcast who had a very bad reaction to the vaccine. Very bad. I mean, she was in the ICU and she's allergic to like everything, like soy sauce now and stuff like that. And that is true. But statistically, it's way safer to get the vaccine than not. Okay, just according to the data. So what happens is what I say to the, so it's so nice that I have these kids who are Jewish now. And when I taught in a school that was like all Hispanic, I would just use that when I talk about these things. But like I would say, if let's say you went home and the windows in your house were smashed, there were swastikas drawn on your building and stuff like that. And I came up to you and I said, you know what? Like statistically, anti-Semitism is really, really small in Los Angeles. Like it's almost nothing. Like that you need to recognize that their lived experience has value. And I think that we can't knock that. Like I think what's happening is getting so much attention lived experience that the pushback is saying ignore it, and that's not the right answer. We have to assimilate it and say this is terrible, and this can guide us towards some sort of objective truth on how frequent is anti-Semitism, and should this lead to some sort of focus on policy or whatever it is. Maybe, maybe not. But the lived
Yeah.
experience has a lot of value as like a motivator to try and get to what is actually true or not. But it isn't to be dismissed completely or made the primary focus. It's supposed to be like the the fuel to get us there. And I think the same thing goes for the vaccines. Is not to say like, oh, just because you had a bad reaction and there's been hundreds of millions of doses and stuff like that, like you don't matter. It's no, it's this matters enough to like, okay, this is a possibility. Still, the vaccine overwhelmingly is safe for most people, but this is a real thing. And I think if we did that more, people would be less like vaccine hesitant. Because I think a lot of what's going on is they're just saying, like, it's safe and effective. It's like, well, yes, and this. And I think the lived experience thing can kind of go both ways across ideological lines. I see it obviously as you do in a lot of racial issues, for sure. But let's not completely dismiss them. Let's just say like these isolated incidents are terrible. Is this leading to something bigger? And we can get into some hard social science, like Roland Fryer. Are you familiar with his work?
No. Mm.
So Roland Fryer is an economist at Harvard, and he's a black dude. And he said he grew up just like running from the cops, scared of the cops, and he's this superstar economist. And he's like, I'm gonna try and do the biggest study on racism within police departments. And what he found was, it's like this. The data gets cited a lot. Is that white perps are more likely to get killed than blacks, but black perps are more likely to get roughed up and punched and tased and things like that, but not be killed. And a lot of people are angry at his data. They're like, well, that's not true. There's problems in the way he collected it, blah, 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 because it didn't support their narrative. But he said, like, I was surprised too. I just assumed that black people were just getting murdered by police left and right, and that just isn't the case. So right. I think there's like, I think for him it was a catalyst to do this huge study, and I think that's what we can use lived experience for like the most effective way.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like when people talk about steel manning the argument, it's like, okay, that happened to you, and it shouldn't happen to anyone. Like, so let's say, you take an example, whether it's the vaccine example or somebody getting roughed up by police. Mm-hmm. We could all probably agree, all rational people could agree, neither of those two things should happen. So, right. We don't want either one. And when you're talking to students, tell me if you agree with this, when you approach it that way and then say, okay, let's, like you said, let's look at how often it is happening, why it's happening, and, taking into account that it shouldn't, what is the appropriate thing to do that also takes into account that it doesn't happen frequently, so that way you don't use like a sledgehammer to kill a mosquito, right? It's right. Not, you're not saying it's fine, we can just, ignore that, but you're saying there's probably a more precise way to deal with these kind of situations than treating it as a systemic problem. For sure. Right? Are there interpersonal issues? Do we need to look at this community or versus that community? So I think I know what I've tried to do when I've worked with kids about it, have brought that up, is to do that, is to say, okay, hear them out, but to try to encourage them to realize there are different kinds of evidence. Yeah. So rather than say like that's bad or not good evidence, just to in a subtle way let them know they're not on the same playing field. They don't get you to the same place. You can't take both of these and get to the right answer. You've got to look at them a little differently, weight them a little differently, and take them apart a little differently. And I've just found that that's getting more difficult, because what comes next is that your evidence over here doesn't count. Are you right. seeing that too? Like the empirical stuff? Yeah, that's bad. That's bad. Yeah. We don't pay attention to that anymore because that's objective. That's white. So that's when it comes to the critical thinking, what I'm concerned about in the schools, and I want to talk to people like you about it, is what do we do to help our students learn what you're trying to teach them, how to like really take these things apart, think analytically. If the narrative is disregard automatically messages from these messengers, messages of this type, or messages obtained using these kinds of methods, because the methods were created by people who are of that type. You know what I'm saying? So it becomes like a minefield trying to teach how to think when the pieces of evidence you want the kids to use, the inputs, are denigrated.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
like, so
yeah.
what do you think? I mean, have you seen that, or when you talk about you can't say things in this when you're old school or whatever, did you run
Yeah.
into that at all, or did you know people who are kind of like, don't use that source, don't talk about it, you can't use this, can't use that, and you're
Oh,
like, well, how
for
do we
sure.
examine evidence if I can't use these sources?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, any kind of conservative source got knocked. Even at the school I'm at now, a bit like it gets knocked. I'm friends with Paul Rossi. I don't know if you read his story in
Yeah,
New York.
yeah.
He was trying to bring in Glenn Lowry, and they're like, no, that'll confuse kids. Like it's unbelievable. So that's the stuff that was like his like straw that like broke Camel's back. It's like, no, this is bad. Like this is bad. So I gotta get out. And that's what I was saying. Like you have these lines where you make it worthwhile, but it's I think that the more that I have them, I say that it's like in my class, I said that it's like Hunger Games of ideas. So if you present an idea and then just constantly have people trying to poke holes in your idea, it's what peer review is supposed to be.
Right.
But even peer review has a lot of issues. John Haidt was saying something like, if there's a study that says caffeine causes breast cancer, then female coffee drinkers are going to be like, what? I'm going to rip this thing apart. And men who don't drink coffee are going to be like, checks out. So we're all susceptible to this. But if I have the whole class kind of poking holes in your ideas, I try to set the framework. And I model this myself of like, if someone shoots down a bad idea of yours, that you should give them a hug. Like, this is a wonderful thing. They're helping you develop better ideas. It's not a
Right.
bad thing to be proven wrong. It's a wonderful thing. It's a shortcut to be proven wrong. So I try to build that like culture within it. But yeah, I mean, there's certain sources that you just kind of stay away from, and I still do. And I mean, nearly all of them are on the right, even though that doesn't necessarily mean that the ones that, I mean, if you use like Huffington Post or something like that, it's nonsense a lot of times. It's real like terrible, but it has that like air of being kinder or benevolent, more woke, whatever. So it's like more acceptable. And I see
Right.
teachers posting that stuff all the time, or podcasts that are very, very progressive that are super, super myopic in like the way that they just present everything. It's just, there's so many holes in it. So
Right.
um yeah,
But I like that
I'm
you're
always
telling them.
fighting
I'm
it.
sorry.
No, I'm always fighting it. Yeah.
No, but I like that you're encouraging them to see being, I don't like to use the word wrong in this case because you're having a conversation,
Yeah.
but to have their ideas challenged, that this is not a dig on them as a person,
Right.
because it feels like, especially with the younger kids, where they're just starting to learn to use their minds in that way, with like using reason, they're still very attached to their opinions, like it's part of them. And I think helping them break out of that and to realize that's just a thought. It's not who you are. you
Right.
know who you
Yeah.
are is more about what you do and how you treat people and that kind of stuff, and what you're open to, like I said, the curiosity and all that, your maturity level, and the willingness to be wrong. Who wouldn't
Yeah.
rather be around people who are like, thanks, that point well taken, I did not know that. I mean, that's a person you want to hang out with again,
Yeah. It's
not
such a
because you
turn
like to
on
be right,
for
it's just
sure.
because there's a feeling of I don't know, I just would prefer to be around people who can teach me something than people who are just going to repeat everything I say. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not like the most
Yeah.
fun, you
Yeah,
know?
and the Socratic method holds up. Like just asking a lot of questions, and it's crazy. Well, that's what when you saw me on that conversation with the three critical race theory people, it's like I was asking a lot of questions to the
Exactly.
point where they said, "Stop
And now
asking
we're
questions."
frozen.
They said, "Am I
Where'd you
frozen?
go?
Can you see me now?"
Uh-oh. Are we
No,
bu- are
no,
we buffering?
no, no.
I hope they're like jamming us. This has been happening to me more and more
No,
lately.
I'm
It's
good.
like
I can hear you.
okay. So, all right. So, what do you think is the um what would you like to see happen in terms of, well, let me back up a second.
Yeah.
So in the situation you're in right now, where you're in a private school and the kids are coming to you, presumably they're able to read very well, they're able to
Yep.
write decently. So in other words, the mechanics are there. Did
Yeah.
you have did you have the same thing in the public school situation, or were you finding that was challenging?
No, it was more of a challenge. It was more of teaching them. I taught in really tough areas though. I had a 17-year-old mother of three who didn't know how to tell an analog clock. Like they were up against a lot. So no, yeah, I'm getting kids whose the literacy rate of the parents at my school is probably 100%, and the literacy rate of the parents at former schools might have been like 30%. I mean, a lot of parents they were illiterate. So it was, there's, yeah, I'm up against I can, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy though. Because of that, I can talk about this more higher level stuff about critical thinking. And it's really hard to teach it to kids who can't read. So, I mean, they need to learn how to read and read critically and read, but I don't know if, I mean, a lot of kids, like, they didn't know how to summarize. They didn't know basic things. So what happens is you find yourself in high school teaching, kids who don't know who Abraham Lincoln is, 16, 17 years old. So you have to focus on that stuff. You have to scaffold for them. You have to, start where they're at.
Right.
And that's a problem. And then those kids who are super capable, they just haven't been educated. They're not dumb. They're a lot of them, some of them are brilliant. I've taught a lot of like brilliant drug dealers, and gangsters. They weren't given, like, I don't speak Russian. It doesn't mean I'm like an idiot. I just was never exposed to learning it. And I think that's the real shame, is these kids could be brilliant thinkers, but they gotta just get training wheels first.
Right. Yeah. It's like if you fail in those lower grades, and by the time you get to high school,
they just move you up.
They just move you up. And, people keep asking, like, why are we teaching, we're teaching kids what to think, not how to think. I'm like, understand that the building blocks of thinking are words. Right. And
Right.
so if you didn't learn to read well, then you didn't like to read. You weren't going to read a variety of texts. You weren't going to build a vocabulary. If you don't build a vocabulary, you don't learn rhetoric. If you don't learn rhetoric, you don't learn thinking. So it all goes together. And then the history part, you just mentioned students not knowing who Abraham Lincoln was. Like, he's on the money.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so many stories I have for you that, I mean, it's really sad. I taught in that environment for like 6 years when I first came out to LA, and it's like, oh man. But I say that all the time. Teach kids, how to think, not what to think. But you're right. Like, you still need the basic frame before you can get into that. You can't jump into how to think without any kind of structure, because then it's just going to be completely just going to be chaos.
Right.
But that shouldn't be our job. I teach 11th and 12th grade mostly. That shouldn't be my job in 11th and 12th grade. That's the job of early childhood education. But a kid fails, they just pass them along. And I get the struggle. I'm not knocking the elementary school teachers, because they're just on their own. They get the kid for an hour or two a day, or maybe, if they had just single subject across the board, then they get them for like whatever, 6 or 7 hours. But the kid's not read to at home. The kid doesn't have nutrition. The kid doesn't have a set bedtime. They don't have any kind of structure in their lives. A lot of these kids, they didn't have structure. So they didn't have like any kind of like bedtime, wake up time, really, what to wear, how to act. They just didn't know. They were just all over the place.
Yeah.
So
I did student teaching in West Philadelphia.
Oh yeah.
And so you can imagine, we were running to the Goodwill to buy winter coats for kids who were showing up in January in a t-shirt.
Just didn't know.
And they didn't know how to brush their teeth. They didn't, there were kids with like severe tooth decay in kindergarten because they had never brushed their teeth. Yeah. So, I mean, there are very real problems, but I can't help but feel like the mere existence of a centrally planned system to take care of other people's children for 8 hours a day and sometimes longer, like drop them off at 6 and pick them up at 6, with before and after care and all this.
For sure.
And we'll feed them lunch and we'll feed them breakfast, and that there's kind of a moral hazard created. It's one of those problems you talk about, like if really smart people, the big brains, were thinking with okay, let's build a big centrally planned system. We'll feed them. We'll take care of them 8 hours a day. And then people go to work. Tell me why I'm wrong. Wish that we'd been in that room, right? That's because
we could poke holes in that all day. Yeah.
We could poke holes in that, because what I would have added to that conversation is, what is the moral hazard of doing that? What is the potential downside of letting people know that when you grow big and you have babies, don't worry about childcare. There's school. right? They're going to be for 13 years. You're going to have a place to drop your kid off at least for 9 months of the year, and we'll figure something out for the summer. And when that was your existence as a child, then it's like planted in there that that's what you're going to do. And are you more or less inclined to do the whole job? Are you more or less likely to have children before you're really ready to do it? You
Right.
know, if it were your responsibility to make sure they had somewhere to be all day and they were getting an education, would you maybe think twice? You know, we don't know, and we'll never know because it didn't work out that way. But I hear a lot of people say, "But we have to have it because of this." And I'm like, it's almost like saying we have to keep giving them free needles because they're addicted to heroin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't
And I
there
think there's an
maybe a
argument
better
for
way?
that. Right. Like there's an argument for that. That's the cool thing is like we don't know for sure, but I think we need to be able to give the pushback. Like I don't know how I feel about needle exchange programs. I think I could argue both sides because
Right.
I know it, but like what's the right move? That's the only way we're going to figure it out is
Right.
through a lot of this back and forth. I do a whole unit in my civics class on unintended consequences. So I give them some examples like the Cobra effect. You know that in India there were cobras in India, so the British government put a bounty on cobras. So if you kill a cobra, you get money. So what people started to do was create cobra farms. They would grow all these cobras,
Oh
kill
my
them to get
god.
a bounty, and then Brayton goes, "Well, no, that's not really what we're doing. We're ending the bounty." So they go, "Oh, well, we can't keep the farms going." They just released all the cobras. So I go into like the different kinds of
Oh
and
my
now it's called like
god.
the Cobra effect. But all these different kinds of unintended consequences. There's positives, there's negatives, and then there's the perverse, which is it makes the problem you're trying to solve worse. And so I do a whole unit on this. So I had these kids come up with like all these different examples of a boat. After the Titanic, they said you need to have a lifeboat for every man, woman, and child on the boat. So they loaded up this one boat with it. It capsized and killed like 300 people. And I just keep going through them, and I keep just saying like it's a whoops, like whoops, 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 and it's like these horrible stories like thalidomide, for like morning sickness for pregnant women, and the babies come out horribly deformed. Whoops, there's asbestos. Whoops, and the way that we prevent that from happening is by like
Lockdowns. Whoops.
yeah,
Sorry.
exactly.
I
Like,
mean,
yeah, like the suicide rate, the anxiety and depression rate in teenagers. Whoops. So, like, let's really think this out. And I agree with you. Like, the people who are in charge, they're in these echo chambers. The people who are at the media are in these echo chambers. I've talked to people who work for like the New York Times. They're just like, they don't, and everyone here is all in the same boat. So you don't get that pushback. And then you go, who would have seen this coming? It's like, all of these people, like there's so many things that happen, and I hear like people on the left or the right, whatever side it like goes against, like who would have seen that coming? Who would have seen it coming? Like anybody,
right.
and you would have if you would have engaged in these conversations.
Right. And it gets really scary when you have more and more difficulty chalking it up to just bumbling or, stupidity or whatever. And you start seeing people, especially with social media. See, in the past, we would just assume that maybe they talked to other people and this was the decision, but now that we can actually see in almost real time, experts, like noted experts in everything from immunology to teen suicide to supply chain management to whatever, going out and trying to get the word out of like, could somebody please tell them that this is going to cause a problem? And you see that gets censored.
Yeah.
You see them get, shut down, banned, all this. And what do you think that's teaching our kids? Like, what is the
Yeah.
message that the average high school student is getting when they see, there you are trying to teach them to be receptive to all different points of view. Then they go online, and to the extent that they're paying attention to current events, or if you're asking them to, and they start to see, wait a minute, anytime somebody is skeptical about anything that's on the cover of the New York Times or CNN, there's like a warning all over it.
Yeah.
What's the message they're getting?
I mean, I am a government teacher that hates the government. So, and I'm an American history teacher that is uber critical of America. I love it. I love this country, but like a best friend's the one that says like, "Girl, you look like trash. Come on, let's get you together." And it's not the person who says you look great all the time. That's not your friend. You're acting like an a-hole. That's your friend. Hey, come on. What are you doing? Be better. I know you can be better. Be better. That's the way I teach American history. So my students know that I'm going after these people who are trying to silence it all the time. And I want them to have a healthy level of like cynicism when it comes to these big institutions and stuff like that, because I can point to that in my US history class, in government, all these different examples of like, this, what they're doing, guys, is not good. Don't just like, you can't just like accept this mainstream narrative, because they're just run by people oftentimes that are in some sort of echo chamber, oftentimes that are, ideologically possessed in one way or another. So I build them up to just distrust things, and then use that as a building block to like, don't just distrust, but like actively try to point them in a bad direction. I had some people, I mentioned something about Alex Jones on my social media, and they were like, oh my gosh, a history teacher talking about Alex Jones. Because I said he like made some valid points. And I'm not like an Alex Jones guy, but I said that. And I said, this would be the project then. This is because this was a teacher saying like, this is terrible. I said, here's the project. Post the whole 3-hour Joe Rogan, Alex Jones interview. And then you say, like, poke holes in everything Alex Jones is saying. Prove him wrong. Don't just censor him. Don't shut him down. Prove him wrong. And I think that the way that you combat Alex Jones is you put him on 60 Minutes, on CNN, on ABC News with some sort of like, big brain, whatever, Sam Harris type, who just did a ton of research and goes through line by line about what he did and why it's wrong. That is so much better than shutting down a person who has like a persecution complex and thinks like they just don't want me saying the truth, and then you shut them down. It just breeds more of that complex. Like bad ideas, I believe you put them in the arena of ideas, bad ideas will be defeated by good ideas. And that's why like give a racist a platform and open it up, because people can shut down bad ideas. I think racism is a bad idea. I think communism is a bad idea. So you open these platforms up. And what's interesting, Deb, is the people who support this stuff, that critical race theory conversation was fascinating, because it's the only time I could get them to actually sit down and talk to me, people like that. And then they did. They thought, they were like, oh, man, you didn't expect this. Like, how you feeling now? And I was like, I feel great. And then I tried to promote it, and then they wanted to shut it down. They got mad at me. I had to make it unlisted because they didn't want it out there, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Like my ideas, I want them out there to take the criticism so I can develop better ideas. But the ones even doing the censoring, they want to even sometimes censor like the criticisms of themselves.
Right. And because what was hilarious was that you did a public service, by kind of allowing them to kind of beat up on you a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a little painful to watch. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh man, what is this? But then I realized there was a method to your madness. They weren't going to keep talking.
I wanted them to keep talking.
Sure. Yeah. So, but it was so illuminating for so many people. There were things they said where the quiet parts were screaming, and I thought it was brilliant. It was absolutely fantastic. And that's why, I brought it to Carlin's attention. Then we broke it down in the happy hour and so forth. But you're exactly right. You've got to get these people. I've said it on my channel before, in America, one of the beauties of America is it's illegal to be a racist. And people are like, oh, and I'm like, but you really wouldn't want to live in the country where they would literally throw you in jail for an opinion they decided was racist. So in that event, you have to let all the views, even the really ugly, nasty racism, you have to let people go ahead and say it, because who's going to decide? Where are you going to draw that line? And that's the lesson I really hope that kids today are going to be able to learn is, and when I talked in the beginning about first principles, freedom of speech is kind of one of the big ones for me. I'm an absolutist in that respect, except for, like incitement to violence. But when you're talking about somebody just expressing some nasty comment, it's like, bring it.
Right, but that's the thing. So you've got to be really worried about all of this social media and like mainstream media censorship stuff, because yes, ideally what you do is you have let's just take this one, a racist and someone who thinks racism is bad, and you platform them both, and then it goes out. But what happens is they're so scared about just someone saying bad things that they shut that down. Like are you even, let's say you had a YouTube channel that was all of the people who died wearing seatbelts. They were burned, they were drowned wearing seatbelts. I'm guessing because of the way that they're handling like COVID stuff, that they would shut that down saying, well, you're going to get people to not wear seatbelts. It's like, no, that's true. People die wearing seatbelts. Far, far, far more are saved wearing seatbelts. Give it to me straight, doc. Let me decide for myself. And maybe I'm just giving people, too much credit, because we do have our fair share of idiots out there that aren't making logical decisions. But that the problem, I agree with you, but don't you? I mean, you must be worried then, because it's not the free exchange of ideas. It's
No,
not.
I am worried. I think it
Works
makes
only
people,
if it's
I
private
think
too.
it actually takes the dumb segment and makes them bigger,
Mm-hmm.
because what I think gets you sort of smarter people is not a whole lot of book learning, although book learning is important. Okay. But when, as you said, you express those ideas, you're free to express those ideas. However, the earth is flat, seatbelts kill, whatever your
Yeah.
dumb idea is. And you expose that. And then, to your point, it's just as free for the people to come out and say, that's just not the way to look at it, because look at how many lives are saved. So you go ahead and you put out all the
Yeah.
people who died wearing seatbelts. Okay, someone could come along and show you all the people who are saved from seatbelts. So you have the platform is there to do both, and you're able to speak to both. You will always have the percentage of people. Always, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what side you're on. There will always be a percentage of people on both, sort of sides of an issue. Seatbelts are great, seatbelts are bad, and that, go to the extreme. But they can't impose their stupidity on everybody else if you have the free exchange of ideas. The reason I'm concerned about all the censorship and the lack of critical thinking that's going on, it's more like narrative thinking and conformity, is that then you get policies, then you get the people who've, only heard the wrong stuff, or only heard one idea. Could maybe not be wrong, but it's not like all right either.
Right.
And they decide they need to mandate that you live that way, or they need to make a policy that tells you what to do. And so that's what makes me concerned, because I do have faith that the majority of people, even if they're not, the most brilliant people who ever were, are, if you show them two things side by side, they'll be like, yeah, I'm still going to wear my seatbelt. Still going to do it. I mean, there are states, as an example, there are states where it's perfectly legal to not wear your motorcycle helmet.
Yeah.
Now, I think
I'm
that
saying
is
that.
suicidal. I think that's insane,
Right.
personally. Okay. And my husband rides a motorcycle, and he would never go without his helmet. He thinks it's crazy too, but
Yeah.
he doesn't think they should be forced to wear their helmets.
Right. Well, we could unpeel this onion even more and say,
And
like, well, if you get injured and then that falls to like the taxpayers or
right,
whatever it is, then maybe you should mandate a. So that's part of this goes to like the big state, the state's influence
right,
on a lot of things. If the state will take care of you if you don't do it, then maybe we have to force you to do it. So
right. But then when we come back to like the beginning where I was like, well, we had a bad law that makes me pay for other people's health care. Now we
yeah,
got to make another bad law because we made that bad law. So I mean, it
right,
can go out of control.
yeah.
And so I guess I have a lot of hope for, what is it, Generation Alpha, if you will. Is that what we're calling the kids now, or
I thought it was Gen Z.
are
Isn't
they
that?
Gen Z? Are they Alpha? I don't know who are. I
I
keep
don't
asking
know.
my
I
kids
think
who.
the teenagers, I teach mostly like 16, 17, 18-year-olds. I call them Gen Z. I think they're Gen Z, but
Okay. I've met both kinds. I've met some who are just like automaton level,
so
but I also know quite a few, including my own children, who are like, yeah, that doesn't pass the smell test. Like they're
yeah,
very cynical, and they're very,
rebellious, which is
yeah.
nice.
And they're kind of like, everyone's going this way. I'm going to go that way. And I just want them to do what you're saying, which is, listen to the different things and have a reason. Have a reason you disagree with that, right? Don't just agree with me because I'm mom. Like, understand why you agree with me.
Isn't it shocking how little people know why they have the positions that they do? Just
It
talking
it
to someone yesterday
it
who,
is.
my wife was like, just talking to a family friend, like, are you pro-choice or pro-life? I'm like, I'm pro-choice. Like, up until when? Where's your line? And they're like, well, until they can't get an abortion anymore. It's like, what is it? No, when is that though? Is that like 9 months. Like, oh, well, no, not 9 months. Okay, well, what is your line then? And as we develop the conversation more and more, she realized that she's actually very conservative. Like, oh, well, as soon as you know that you're pregnant, you should have to make the decision. It's like, yeah, as soon as you, that's why the Socratic method is so
Right.
scary and like dangerous to a lot of these people, is because you ask them enough questions and they won't be able to answer them. And
Right.
that just has been my experience. It's why people who the most criticizing people on my social media, I open it up. I say, will you have a live conversation with me? You're terrible. You're a racist, sexist, homophobe. You're this, you're that, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. I say, I'll give you a full hour to just break down all the reasons why. Will you take it? And they won't.
What's wild. I mean, like,
Yeah.
why would someone miss out on that opportunity? So where do you see this going? Like,
Oh,
what do you hope happens moving forward to education in America? I know it's a huge question, but just to kind of like bring it full circle, we've got you're working on with Cylinder Radio, and even in your classroom, you're working on getting people to value and champion diversity of ideas.
yeah.
And in particular in the classroom, especially government and civics classroom, it's important in every classroom really, but it's especially important there. But in general, across the board, like as you survey the education landscape,
Yeah.
what
So
do you
I
think?
think, look, what I think is going to happen and what I hope is going to happen, I'm going to try and merge them. I think it's going to get worse until it gets better. I think a lot of kids being at home on Zoom open parents up. Parents were not invested in their kids' education, and then all of a sudden it was in their living room, and they go, "What? Oh my gosh, I'm going to get involved in my kids' education." So that's a positive. I think that the free market's going to show up. I think a lot of these really woke, progressive private schools on the East Coast and stuff are going to get people leaving. There's going to be a mass exodus out of those um, for a lot of people. And I think that even in the public school system, they're getting enough pushback that more and more charters that are going to promote this kind of stuff. And what's interesting is like it's across the board. It's Democrat and Republican. It's not like all the Democrats are on board with this or whatever. It's probably more conservative, but there's definitely a fair share of like disaffected Democrats. That's what I am. That's what a lot of people are that I resonate with. Is like, oh man, they don't represent us anymore. I think the free market's going to step up, and I think charter schools and community schools are going to start popping up, and they're going to be a real problem. Just like anything else, Kodak was like digital cameras, and then all of a sudden digital cameras, and Netflix and Blockbuster, and I think that's going to happen with education. I think it has to. I've been trying to scream about these ideas of like critical theory in education for like 3 or 4 years, maybe. 2017 is when I started. So that's 4 years. And it just really hit after the George Floyd stuff. So it's been like a year that it's like mainstream. Critical race theory, I've been talking about that for a long time, but now everyone knows what it is. So I think that as people wake up to it, they're going to be pushing back. And I think that there's an opportunity for curriculum builders, for individuals to create some sort of alternative. And I think that the move to get alternative schooling is going to be huge. A lot of people are going to be homeschooling, so there's a huge opportunity there for curriculum online and other ways to think outside the box in the way we do education. So I'm optimistic long
Mhm.
term. Short term,
I
I'm still pessimistic.
Right. I am exactly where you are. Like short term, I'm just, I'm still raising the alarm for more people. But you said something about Democrats, Republicans, and I don't usually do like politics on this show, but lately I've been feeling the need to get like stick my toe in a little bit more because
Yeah,
I'm actually finding the more centrist, center left, like people who would have formerly called themselves Democrats, maybe, but they weren't like hardcore,
yeah,
are doing more to take this on, dismantle it, attack it, start organizations to defeat it, than the typical conservative groups. Like, for example, and I've railed about it on my show already once. That Mark Levin said a bunch of things about you need to take back the school boards and take back they work for you and things. And I went into a forum on Facebook where it was mostly conservative people, and I tried to let them know that I thought he was wrong. I shared with them an article written by C. Bradley Thompson, who I've had on my channel, explaining that that's just not, it's not a bottom up problem. It's a top down problem, from the universities to the teachers colleges to the pedagogy and the writers and all that. And not only that, that's not how school boards work. Like school boards don't really control the curriculum in most places. It's usually the state board. And then the school board kind of like does more day-to-day stuff, physical plant safety, these kind of things. So it's not that they can't do anything, but they don't make or break what the teachers are doing in the classroom. It's just not how it works. They're not your boss. They're volunteers, and that's just not what happens. So I tried to say that, and these people tore me to shreds. They tore me to shreds. Like I had like no audience. It was like, these are our schools. And it was like, I am shocked at what a sacred cow this was to conservatives.
Yeah.
Whereas I would talk to people on the more liberal side and they're like, yeah, this is FUBAR. We're going to start our own school. We're out, like, and, and they were not as quick to keep it support, this. Now I'm not talking about the people who are diehard union loyalists or people who are very pro union or people who are very pro, because I would say them as more leftists than Democrats. Like, think of more like
Yeah.
JFK Democrats. Okay. But
Right.
these were the people who are saying, wait, they're infringing on freedom of speech. They're telling my kid what to say. They're telling my kid what to think. Oh no, this is not going to work. Meanwhile, on the conservative side, they didn't like that either. But the approach was more like, we need to own the schools. We need to put 1776 in there. We need to do this. And I'm like, you guys are like missing the plot. And I'm not going to say it's true of everyone. I don't want to
Yeah.
generalize. I'm just saying if people who came to me or responded to my videos when I tried to share, I got more positive feedback from people who were more like libertarian leaning or center left than I
Yeah.
got from the right. The right
That's
was like,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was shocked. I really
I
was. I was shocked.
Do you think that just first time that makes sense to me? But it's the first time I've like heard it put that way, and it's from your personal experience. I wonder if it is conservatives are used to it's us versus them. It's left and right, Democrats, Republicans. They're like nothing new. This is just the way it's always been. But those disaffected Democrats like myself are saying like, "Whoa, this is not cool. I got to take my like I got to get out of here. I got to get out of this us versus them mentality. I got to go do my own thing. I got to change all this because I'm not used to this. I don't really want to play this game to some degree, maybe. Like it's just they see it as something different because they've been on the inside of that side for so long that they go, this is illiberal. This is racist. This is all these things that I've been against my whole life. So F all this, where the conservatives are just like, we knew you've been bad the whole time, but just because you're the other. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like,
No, it totally does.
yeah,
And
what if it's
the
that?
other thing
Or
is
fuck
the
all that.
word liberal itself, like that those of us who consider ourselves classical liberals or like
Yeah.
libertarian or whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
we didn't like the fact that the word liberal was turned into a dirty word. That people who are actually leftists co-opted it and turned it into something ugly.
Yeah.
And then people on the right would be like libtard and lib this, lib that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I hate to break it to you, our founders were actually liberals. It's just
Right.
you're thinking of it in this sort of, more of the postmodern version of that and a different way. And but I just found it interesting and kind of sad because I'm really trying to help people. And that's not to, again, it's not to say all. There are plenty of people, especially those who are religious minded people who are saying, thank you for what you're doing and all this kind of stuff. But there's a chunk who just stubbornly refuse to let the public system go. And I'm just aghast. I'm kind of like I'm shocked. I thought you guys would be the first ones to say burn it to the ground because it's the government.
Yeah.
And instead it's like whatever indoctrination was done. And I did try to explain to people that just because you liked it better, just because it was I pledge allegiance to the flag, just because it was America's wonderful or whatever,
Yeah.
didn't make it not indoctrination.
Right.
You just liked it better. There wasn't a lot of critical thinking teaching going on even in the 70s and 80s. It
Right.
it just wasn't. It's the nature of the beast, right?
For
It's
sure.
just that they shifted what the idea set was. So I just thought I would mention that because you brought it up and I was like, you might be surprised.
Yeah.
So, especially being in California, you probably don't get it as much, but
No, and I talked to some teachers that are in like some of the red states, Wyoming. I have a friend who's in North Dakota or something like that. I think
right.
Idaho,
Right.
and they have the opposite. They have a lot of like right wing, hardcore right wing teachers pushing their beliefs. That's like No, that's bad
Right.
too.
It's
So
not about like just we keep the schools, we replace the beliefs. The underlying model of whoever's in control government wise, whether it's local or federal, telling the kids what to think is wrong. Period. Like
yeah,
that's kind of where I come from, and that's why I'm against like government monopoly of this whole thing because it's just going to just shift whoever's in power is going to decide what your kids have to learn, and that doesn't necessarily connect with what they actually need to learn, what they
yeah,
need to know, so anyway, we have kept you for long enough. Thank you so much for
no,
your
I enjoy it
time.
for
And
sure.
I really am interested in what you're working on. Just tell the audience what you're working on next. You got the podcast, anything else going on?
Yeah, coming up on my 100th episode of Cylinder Radio. It's been really cool. I've any big controversial issue, I try to highlight all perspectives on it through like respectful conversation. So you can find that wherever podcasts are found, and my YouTube, and which is my name. And then I use Instagram. Like that's like my primary thing. I do stories every day, kind of just on my
Okay.
my process. That's just what it is. It's like my process of learning. I don't know, so it's okay for you not to know. So here's what my process is, and then maybe you can have your own process and kind of follow along and stuff like that. It's all just
Okay.
about learning.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. And so you guys, if you want to connect with Will, he's got I put his website down below, and then your Instagram is at Will Roche. Is that where
Yeah.
you're at?
Yep.
Okay.
Just my name.
So it's just add his name, and then you can follow along with what he's doing. And again, thank you so much. And I
Thank
wish
you.
you the best of luck in your new job. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And
Thank
I
you.
hope it continues to go well for you. And if you have any other cool stuff to share with us, let me know in the
Will
future,
do.
and I'd love to have you back on. But this was
Oh,
really informative and helpful. And thank you so much.
yeah. I love what you're doing too, Deb. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
You're welcome.
All
Thanks
right.
a
Bye
lot.
bye.
Bye.